Hi everyone. Thanks for being here. I guess I'm going to talk to you about cyborgs. Could you all hold your phones up really fast? Oh, you're the fastest one, you win. The faster you held those up, the more cyborg-like you are. Some of you are more reluctant cyborgs than others. I'm going phone-free today, so I've had to borrow other people's cyborg abilities. I had to ask the time. I had to ask somebody to Google something for me. But the idea is that we're all cyborgs, and it's really that if we look at traditional tools, they're often extensions of our physical selves. Like a hammer is an extension of our fist, or a knife is an extension of our teeth. But when we look at digital tools, I lost a slide. If we look at digital tools, they're mostly extensions of our mental selves. And so if we look at a phone, it's an extension of our brain and our hand. And so there's a kind of slight difference in that physical tools like hammers, they've been around for millions of years. The shape, the size, the implementation, how we make them, what they're used for is pretty stable. But then the things in our pockets change every year. As Freud said in his book, Civilization and Discontents, he warned of a future in which we are annoyed by ill-fitting prosthetics, in which if we don't upgrade our device, then it turns against us. So right now we're dealing with so many different devices around us. Instead of having many people share one computer, like in the mainframe age, we have many devices sharing each of us. So we are all cyborgs. You don't have to be RoboCop or Terminator to be a cyborg. The original definition of cyborg came from a 1960 paper on space travel. The definition is some external component that you add to yourself to adapt to a new environment. Somebody in a spacesuit is using lots of external components to adapt to a place that a human should not be able to go. We do this with a pair of shoes to go up a mountain. We do this when we put on scuba diving gear. We do this when we pretty much have to own a phone to be in a city anymore. So a traditional anthropologist goes to other countries and makes broad generalizations about the other people in them, brings them back to their country and says how interesting these people are, how unique their tools are, look at their kinship relations. I kind of looked at this traditional anthropology and I said, wait a second, what about studying the people right next to you? What about studying the fact that our phones cry and we have to pick them up and soothe them back to sleep? That we wake up next to them in the morning, we might look at them before we actually look at the person next to us. That they have to be fed and we have to plug them into the wall. That sometimes we take care of them better than we do our own selves. What does that mean? How can we study a kind of cyborg anthropology where we have non-human allies in our pockets that are with us all the time, that are kind of like the new cigarettes? Every down moment now we're just going into our phone. So I also saw this quote that 50 billion devices would be online by 2020. And when I was in college, I actually wrote my thesis on mobile phones. Because in 2007, the iPhone had just come out. And I was noticing the difference between a feature phone and the T9 and somebody typing on that and people getting absorbed into the iPhone. People would put their dogs on pause when they were walking down the street to text somebody back. And I thought, what's the difference? There's this physical interface of physical buttons or the desktop computer, and then suddenly there's this liquid interface that could be anything. This is this massive change. And so when I saw this quote that 50 billion devices would be online by 2020, it doesn't matter how many billions of devices we have, that's more devices than there are people in the world. And I like to ask whether that sounds good. How many of you were promised that the more tech you added, you would have an easier life, that we'd have more free time when we were given technology? How many of you have more free time because you use technology? I think an earlier generation of technology, the washing machine, the dryer, the lawnmower, the hairdryer, these are the original killer apps for electricity. They did give us more time. But what happens when you get more time? You fill it up with more stuff. Now we're expected to do more and more things in our everyday lives. And there's this point that futurists like to talk about, where as long as we just add more tech, everything will be solved. And that keeps getting shoved further and further into the horizon. At some point, machines will act just like humans. Do we expect dogs to act like humans? No, they're dogs. Why would we expect a computer to act like a human? A computer should act like a computer and be the best it can be as a computer. So I like to consider a few things that we already have in our environments. The smartwatch, which might replicate the notifications we already get on our phone. Of course, a lot of the notifications we get on our phone are from bots. They're from apps, they're not from individuals. If you get one thing out of this talk, just spend 5 minutes today and turn off all unnecessary notifications on your phone. You will feel a lot better. I keep my phone in airplane mode most of the time, and today it's completely out of battery, so I just kind of left it. But I've kind of tried to structure my day so that I'm mostly in human time. When we start to try to get chips and smartness into everything, we get things like the smart fridge. I've been hired by companies to help them build smart fridges. Okay, what do you want in your smart fridge? Well, we want a thumbprint reader on the fridge so that it recognizes who you are and only allows you in if you haven't eaten, if you haven't maxed out your calories for today. I said, well, what if I'm making a cake? My thumb is covered with flour. I can't get into my fridge. And how do we add more people? It's like, oh, well, you call the company and then they get you on a payment plan. What does it do? It locks you out when you've eaten too many sweets. Like, I put my sweets in the dumb cupboard, not the smart fridge. Why do I need to worry about this? And then they said, well, we're gonna have a fridge that tells you when your bananas have gone bad. The bananas have a pill that tell you when it goes bad. It changes color. Like, are these things absolutely necessary? It'd be better to have something underneath your sink that tells you if there's going to be a leak in 2 weeks because it understands those variables. That's useful technology. When you put this all together, you get what I like to call the dystopian kitchen of the future. Everything is speaking a different programming language. It's all shouting at you. Nothing's compatible, and you have to Bluetooth into everything. It's taking up more bandwidth than streaming Game of Thrones on Netflix, and it's a security risk because all of these things are vectors for attack. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be a system administrator in my own home. I just want to go home. And I grew up in 2 different smart homes and then helped build 2 other smart homes. So I know this kind of history of what is reasonable to put into a home and what's not. When you start to connect things to human life or animal life, that's when it becomes difficult. There have been all these pet feeding apps out there. Usually they're set on a timer and they give some kibble. PetNet said, well, we'll run it through the web, and then you can Skype your animals as well, and as feeding them and watering them. The problem is that the feeding schedule was operated on a remote server, and the server failed, and the cats and dogs were stranded. People didn't know where they were. They didn't know if they were alive or not. They were breaking into their own houses to get these dogs and cats out and to feed them. But the promise was that, look, it's new, you should trust it. 2, it's convenient, and you don't have to worry about your pets again. In the terms and service, it said, we're not responsible for any failure, and you agree not to use this hardware for the well-being of your pet. Yet on the website, it said, you can trust us. There was no regulation, there was no testing, there was no, hey, it's fun when Twitter fails. It's not fun when your cat or dog dies because you trusted in a piece of new technology. We often think that new tech is really cool, mostly because we don't know all the issues with it. We know all the issues with old tech, so it's fine to say, oh, that's really old, we know that. But it's better to improve something sometimes and test it out just a little bit. Chronos time and Kairos time are Greek words for different kinds of experiences of time. Chronos time is kind of the idea that it's this industrial time. It's really good for making sure that you do the same thing again and again. Most big companies get into Chronos time only, and so you have meetings from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. where people talk about doing stuff, but they never actually do anything about it. You have a retreat, and the retreat is where you really figure out what you really want to do in that company. That's Kairos time. That's the time of watching a sunset, or falling in love, or having nothing to do, or staring out the window into the rain, or the eureka moment from Archimedes running down the street after taking a break and then discovering the density of gold so he could figure out whether a crown was fake or not. But this type of time is being erased because every time you look at your phone, you get right back into Chronos time. It's really hard to innovate in Chronos time. So the question is, how do we work with our devices so that they get us back into human time instead of taking that time away? So if we have an era of interruptive technology, we need the opposite. We need a kind of calm technology. It's interruptive in battery life, connectivity, interrupting us mentally. We don't need smarter devices. We need smarter humans. How do we design that? In the mid-90s, Mark Weiser and John Seeley Brown worked at Xerox PARC, a research institute that didn't just hire technologists, but they hired artists and anthropologists to counter the technological mindset. It worked. This is where we got not only printers, but we got graphic user interface, we got Ethernet. There was an anthropologist that worked with them that noticed that people hated using printers. They had all these buttons because engineers loved people being able to click on the buttons. And she said, look, people just need one big button. Let's make a big green copy button, and most people will be able to do what they want with it. This is kind of how the legend goes. But it took one anthropologist understanding that people didn't just want to be technologists, that the people making the tech weren't necessarily the same mindset of people that were using the tech. These two wrote a number of papers, which I have on calmtech.com. They are readable in every era. They are readable by anybody with any background. They are so clear and they are so classic. One is called The Coming Age of Calm Technology, in which they talked about how originally we shared many people shared one device, and now many devices share each of us. And that even though technology was expensive in the past, in the future it would be cheap. And the scarcest resource would not be technology, but it would be our attention. How technology worked with or broke our attention would make or break that technology. People talk about invisible tools and invisible technology, but this is the original quote of invisible technology. A good tool is invisible because you focus on the task and not the tool. It's not this invisible thing that knows what's best for you and is making decisions on your behalf. That's why we had the movie War Games. We don't want a computer making our decisions for us. We want a computer giving us information so that we can make the executive decision, helping to do some of the things we don't want to do, but we want the original idea of cybernetics, which is to work alongside technology, not have technology do something for us and then we're just sitting there on pause. A book is interesting because you're adding your imagination to the interface, and you're the one that's bringing it to life. The interface is calm, but your imagination is hallucinating characters that you end up knowing better than your next door neighbor. It's an incredibly useful tool. That's why Legos are so classic. You're adding your imagination to them. We keep overbuilding technology, but if we do things that work with the natural operating system in our brains, then we can work alongside the tech and still respect human culture and intelligence at the same time. So how do we actually design calm tech? There's a number of different principles that we can use. The first is that technology shouldn't be requiring all of our attention, just some of it and only when necessary. How can we tell if it's necessary? Well, you don't want to have somebody watch it the whole time. We can use peripheral attention. We have a lot of high resolution attention here in front of our face, but it's lower resolution as we go out. We can still feel things on our skin, we can still hear things in our background, we can still get light information. It's lower resolution, but we can still get information. So how do we compress information into lights or sounds or tones and have a kind of ambient awareness about a situation? We don't always need to look at a screen, but we can glance forward and back, and we can decide if we want to focus on higher detail. That way we're not constantly taken out of our environment every time there's a new alert. A tea kettle is pretty silly because it shouts at you, so it's not entirely calm. But you can set it, forget it, and it'll call to you when it's ready. Which is nice, you can go do something else. You're not sitting there watching it. If this were built today, we'd have to Bluetooth into the kettle and it would have a countdown and it would have Alexa shout at us that the tea is done or something like that. So empowering your peripheral attention is really interesting because it gives you some information without having to bother others. I had an employee that got an insulin pump installed, and he was really excited because he would become more human that way. He wouldn't have to, it wouldn't be obvious that he had diabetes. The problem is that insulin pump made a beep when it needed to be refilled, and he couldn't turn off the beep. He couldn't change it into a different notification style. In the world of a desktop computer, you know that somebody's sitting in front of it, you know they have a wired connection, you know they have screen resolution and maybe some software that's done with like a CD-ROM that doesn't need to be updated. But in the real world, you don't know how people are going to use the technology. And the best thing you can do if you don't know is allow them to change it to their needs. Don't try to adapt it for them using AI. Allow them to have the choice to adapt it to their situation. This insulin pump was designed for caretakers, so that somebody in an assisted living home could have a caretaker that could hear the beep and refill the insulin pump for them. They didn't realize that once they worked with all the compliance and everything, that they had to have it in this squeaky tone and they couldn't change it to a haptic buzz. It's as annoying as listening to somebody's Outlook notifications next to you. Those are for them, not you. But why are you hearing this audio pollution? So now I met a family in Sweden that hacked their device to take out the speaker so that the kid would not be bothering their classmates in class. The worst part is if somebody's in a really loud situation, like a concert, they can't hear the beep. But if it's a buzz, then it's for them and them alone. So allowing somebody to change notification style is really, really important. So technology can inform and calm it the same way. This is my old kitchen, and we were watching a lot of ads about the future of everything. It's usually like some perfect San Francisco condo with some guy that wakes up, speaks perfect English, American English, San Francisco English. And of course, the AI always understands him the first time he says something. And it's this situation where there's a robotic voice that's telling him about his morning. And I said, why do you need to be woken up by a robotic voice? Why can't you just walk into the kitchen and have a light that shows the color of the weather that it's going to be that day? You can take the information about the weather, convert it into a color. When you walk into the kitchen, you can feel what it's going to be like that day. So I live in Portland, Oregon. Usually this light when I walked in the kitchen was blue because it was going to be rainy out. But this particular morning it was yellow, and I knew it was going to be sunny out, and I was excited. And of course there's higher resolution display on the wall through an iPad, but you can choose to look at the higher resolution information. It's not in your bedroom, you're not waking up to the weather. By the time you stumble into your kitchen to get a cup of coffee, you can understand what the weather's going to be and make a decision. You can use this for all sorts of things. It's really boring technology, but it's using the least amount of information, and it's not in your face, trying to jostle you out of your everyday life. If I understand what this means, great. If a guest come over, they don't have to understand what it means, it's fine. Tech should be amplifying the best of what we do and the best of what tech does. Tech is really good at going through lots and lots of information. We're really good at understanding how to curate that information, what's best for us, contextual information. Hopefully, we're good at empathy. The more we automate, the more we need to worry about customer service, because at scale, everything will fail, and we need to make sure there's a good backup plan. I've been stuck in between airports where I tried to put my ticket through and I bent the QR code, and it was just an automated ticket gate. The only thing I could do was wave at the security camera, hoping somebody wasn't on a bathroom break so that they would come through and actually get me through the system and manually override it. But in an era in which we want to automate everything, then what happens when it goes wrong? Google is a good example of a company that does automation right. You're adding something to the search database when you type it in, and it's not giving you one result, it's giving you a series of choices, and you're the one choosing something for yourself. It's not trying to guess at what is right for you. That's why they removed the I'm feeling lucky button. It wasn't usually correct. This is my friend Todd Huffman. He was annoyed that grad students had to prepare tissue samples to scan to see if they were going to become cancerous. So he made a robot that does it 1,500 times faster than a human. And he's putting it together into a voting network. So a doctor can vote on whether this became cancerous or not, what kind of cancer it became, how long it took to develop. And it's that feedback loop of humans and machines that's better than a single AI or a single individual doctor. Because it's this feedback loop that keeps getting better and better and better. Now when a doctor looks at the system, they can see when they load in a tissue sample, this might be this, or this. It's narrowing down their search field. It's not telling them exactly what it's going to be, but it's giving them percentages. This fuzziness prevents people from getting an exact idea about something. It allows them to still apply their intellect to find something out and do further research. Tech can communicate, but it doesn't need to speak. This is the Roomba robotic vacuum cleaner. The early version, when it finished, it would go dun 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 dun, and when it was stuck, it would go dun dun. That's it. Why is that useful? Because it's universal. You don't have to translate this into a bunch of different languages. It's a tonal thing. It's not saying in a robotic voice, I am done cleaning the floor. That's what we got from film. Film has led us astray because it says that we should have things that speak and look like a human in order to be bots. This is based on a trilobite. The original model was actually a mine-detecting robot that would go out. It was really large until they got the supply chain to make it small enough. But if you look at Star Wars and you look at C-3PO, you might know 2 million languages, but he's annoying in every single one of those languages. Whereas R2-D2 speaks a tonal language and is hilarious, and you kind of understand whether R2 is having a good time or not, or whether he needs help. And we end up personifying that character more. The other reason why this robotic vacuum cleaner is so beloved, and that cats ride around on it in YouTube videos, is because it's not perfect. We have to pick it up, we have to help it out. This is why Tamagotchis and those little pocket pets were so successful, because we had to feed them, we had to care for them. And that bonds us to the machine. A machine that's perfect leaves us nothing to bond to. A film that's already filled out with all the special effects leaves us nothing to remember. It's those unfinished things that allow us to add something human to them that give us something back. It's hard to explain to somebody who wants to automate everything that the human becomes the most important in a world of automation. The right amount of tech is the minimum to solve the problem. It's really hard to figure out the least amount of tech to use, but it's really important when you look at things like streetlights that are just punctuation for the city. These are in your ambient awareness. You understand green or red. You can go to any country. You understand how this works. There's some form of signaling that people use. It's not verbal. The toilet occupied on the sign on the plane is an example of a pictogram. It's pretty universal, even if it's kind of inaccurate at this point. But the more important thing is that everybody understands this kind of system of symbols. Even if you're red-green colorblind, you can understand whether it's occupied or not, whether you can use it or not. These boring, everyday things are successful, calm technologies. Once a technology becomes very successful, not only does it just dissolve, but sometimes it makes a lot of money too. So it's successful to do this. These are now kind of universal things. I mean, 3M makes so much money off of just the road signs because they have a kind of standard way of giving information around the city. Technology should be working locally. Every time you have to go up to the cloud to do something, you risk data breach, you risk, you have to manage that data, you have an issue with connectivity, you have an issue with speed, you have an issue with battery life. But if you can work with the information on the device as much as possible and not store it somewhere else, you can enable and empower somebody locally. It's a little bit harder to do because people are used to using everything on the web. But if you were actually to turn your phone on airplane mode right now, what apps would you actually be able to use? There's not that many. Whereas on a desktop computer in that era, we expected to be able to do everything from that desktop computer and it was just fine. So now we've gone in the exact opposite direction where everything's far away from us again and we need to meet somewhere in the middle. I'd like to have my medical records stored on a phone, bring them to the doctor every time I go, and have the doctor add more to that database so that I can take it home with me. That way, if somebody hacks into that doctor's office, they're only getting the files that are shared in that moment for the last 15 minutes, not the entire database of everything. These data wells are too exciting for hackers, and everything will be hacked and has already been hacked. If any of you had a person who would repair your TV, or radio, or bed, or anything, there's this idea that somebody understands the mechanics of something and you can repair it locally. In some countries, this is completely done. This is normal and empowering to do. But if we're using tech that we can't maintain, that we can't extend, then how are we going to add more and more tech? If you're in a hospital and you can't maintain your own tech in the hospital, you have to call some Swiss company up and have some expert fly in. Is that actually useful or is that really, really expensive? If you can't tailor that tech to your own needs, then what's the point of that tech? If the tech goes out of business and when it goes out of business, you can no longer use it anymore and it becomes a brick, then what kind of tech is that? What on you that you're wearing right now will you have in 10 years? Will you use anything in your pocket for the next 10 years? Can we make tech that gets better that you want to hand down to the next generation? This is a challenge. It's possible, maybe not possible. So if good design allows people to accomplish their goals in the least amount of moves, which is very difficult to take moves away until there's nothing left to take away. Then a calm tech allows people to accomplish the same goals, but with the least amount of mental cost. Because, as Mark Weiser said, shouldn't our primary task as humans to be being human instead of just working with tech? And even more so, you should have a choice. If you want to work with tech, you can, but if you don't want to and you're good at other things, you shouldn't have to. That maybe a lot of people's focus is being a healthcare professional or a teacher, and the technology should work alongside them instead of against them to help them to their goals, not be the main focus. Right now, tech is the main focus. It's very exciting, but it needs to be something that supports us. And as Weiser said, the scarce resource is no longer tech, it's our attention. How we work with that attention, how we make or break it, will make or break future products. The products that do well in the next generation can work with our attention very well and empower us. I was upset because Mark Weiser died and he wasn't around to see the era that he predicted, so I wrote a book called Calm Tech. It's mostly for people building products. And then I got upset about the state of sound and all these really annoying beeps that happen, especially in hospitals. So I wrote a book on sound and how to use different frequencies to make people's lives a little bit better and to put information in those frequencies as well for information. I also made a website that has all the original papers, which I encourage you to read. It's really refreshing. Instead of saying, oh my gosh, how is my company going to keep up with all the new tech? Say, well, actually, here's some core principles to look for when we're adopting tech. And if that tech doesn't have it, it's probably not going to survive and it's going to be hard to integrate with the company. It's a really good way of being calm and not always just getting carried away by hype of a new thing that hasn't been tested but looks really shiny. It's okay to be a late adopter as long as you're doing something where you've learned from all the other early adopters. So thank you very much, appreciate it.